Hey guys, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you guys for coming and hanging out. Really appreciate it. We have some extraordinary guests here that are deeply engaged in the analytics space, from historical background with web and mobile, and now into this new bot paradigm. And what's interesting about bots is, we're hearing all this noise and there's all this activity. We have very little information in ways of like daily active users and what's actually happening. So we're here to talk about just what are some of those broad frameworks for metrics that we've been thinking about with bots. What are the interaction models like? What needs to be built that's not built? How are people measuring this stuff now? So maybe just to start real broad, what's a good framework to be thinking about for analytics for bots? And I think I want to start with you guys, just because you have such a deep mobile background, and that's kind of where you're from. And there's sort of a natural transition there. So feel free to introduce yourself, by the way. And
Hi, my name is Chris Klotzbach. I lead the growth and developer relations team for Flurry Analytics. So Flurry's been around since 2008. It's mobile app analytics, and we help app developers grow and monetize their businesses. Should we keep going down? Or
No.
Yeah. No, I think that there's a lot of learnings and best practices that we can take from mobile analytics and the instrumentation of analytics solution in apps and apply that to, say, a consumer bot experience within a messaging platform. One thing that we've noticed over the past year or so is that consumers and users are shifting their time from traditional app categories like games towards messaging and social platforms as well as productivity applications, and there's definitely a correlation between the reason that this conference is focused on bots and the way that users, consumers, and business people are using those types of mobile applications. So I think that there is analytics that you can apply into a bot experience, and the way that we often look at it from an app perspective that applies to a bot experience would be understanding the goals of that bot, setting out KPIs there, and then instrumenting or looking at the triggers within, say, a chat that would drive to a conversion or what you define as success.
so Omar, you're in the trenches here, with a mobile gaming company, and now actually building tons of commercial and consumer bots.
Sure.
How's it look for you?
Yeah, so I would say when we're coming at this with an interactive storytelling background, which we had expressed previously through games. And we built SQL to be a platform where creators and developers could build conversational experiences for media and entertainment. Right? And so it's media, entertainment, content, things that are as important to connect emotionally with consumers as they are in connecting utility. Right? So yes, you're going to derive value out of it, but there's also an emotional component when you connect with a brand or you connect with a piece of IP that you really care about. Right? And so for us, the KPIs that matter to us fall into two categories. One are the things we look at from a performance perspective on how well is this bot doing, right? So from a macro perspective, right? And so traditionally, these are metrics like DAUs and MAUs, and the ratio of those gives you an engagement level. And this is what was really prominent in the app world. And in the case of bots, one of the things that we've also layered in has been actually less of a DAU orientation and more of a network messages or messages per day metric to also judge engagement. Because the degree of engagement you get from a bot in a case-by-case basis is going to vary based on what the bot is. And so from a performance perspective, I think a lot of the traditional app thinking still applies, but with also a intensity of engagement metric around messages. The other broad set of metrics and analytics that we focus on are not just on how the bot is doing from a performance perspective, but diagnostically, how can we iterate the bot to make it better, right? And here, if it's an NLP-based bot where there's a natural language expectation between the bot and the user, we're looking at things like, hey, how often is a user not getting matched on the basis of what they're inputting, right? And so those are then, or if it's a button-based bot where the interactions are actually on the basis of native UI that's more keyword-based, there we're looking at, hey, which branches of the conversation tend to be overutilized or underutilized to see whether we're intuitively meeting the needs of what people actually want to get out of the bot. And so I put the analytics that matter into those two categories. There's the hero metrics that you want to focus on to see whether the bot is doing a good job at whatever its job is, right? And those metrics will be different relative to the type of bot it is. And then the other are the things you should be looking at that your conversational designer, that your UX specialist, that your product manager, and your development team and or developers are all going to want to be focused around fixing and improving and iterating the bot.
So for these engagement-focused bots, where you want to keep people like the time on bot at the maximal level, when does the actual instrumentation take place? How does the data come back to the bot and say, here's what the user's saying, here's how to react as a result?
So, I mean, I'm sure everyone will have their own model for this. For us, we've tried to build basic sort of capabilities into any bot that we build, and that using our platform, right? But basically, for us, it's through looking at just the number of messages per day by bot. Like, we're finding that depending on the purpose of the bot, that is turning into a pretty good typology for what the bot's job is, right? So we have several people who have built sort of trivia or quiz-based bots, and there's a certain number of messages per day that people are exchanging with that bot that are typical then for that genre, versus there's other bots that are more narrative-based or more games. Those are going to have a different usage profile. But in terms of the guts of it, it's very much par for the course for any other web-based business at this point, which is there's events being thrown off through the the messages of the platform, and when those events are coming back through our platform, you as a creator can drop it into whatever analytics platform you want to use to analyze it further, or for like a basic console, we'll provide it. But otherwise, if you want to do more detailed analysis, it's something you can take advantage of, various analytics platforms.
I'll say I think that there's a lot of parity with even, say, a desktop event as well as conducting, let's look at a commerce app, right? There are specific actions a user needs to take in order to actually convert. And the way that you would measure that against that in a bot would be, okay, the macro level, is the person engaging in general? Are they responding to the bot there? And then you move down into the conversion funnel. Has the product been served by the bot? Again, that's like a utility of the bot experience. Is it actually able to find a product? Is the user then engaging in that product page? Have they filled out the form to purchase it? And then did they actually conduct the purchase?
Sure.
So it's new. It's a new space, but it's also just leveraging analytics in the way that we've looked at it from web to app and now into a chat platform.
Now, what's interesting with that use case, I think the important metric would be to get in and then get out as fast as possible from the bot. And I think, Sean, you might have a similar perspective with enterprise bots, business-based bots. You don't want to be spending too much time interacting with this thing. You want it to get the thing done.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of two parts of, I guess, my own career experience in this that drive it, and I sort of feel almost religious about it. So about 10 years ago, I worked for a startup called IamLogic, and what we did is we helped banks and enterprises adopt public instant messaging networks. But one of the first problems we had to deal with was bots. And bots were things that would send things into rooms, that would repeat things, that would share links, that would get through your buddy list. And so bots had a very bad connotation at that time. And what we built was a real-time threat protection system that would look at the frequency of a message, the consistency of that message between other messages, the links that were shared, and propagation, and begin to throttle those things because the users weren't happy with it. And so to me, that talks about a problem that exists within chat, which is the signal-to-noise ratio. And if you think about MobileBeat as a conference a year ago, 5 years ago, the first question to an app developer would be, what kind of traction do you have? This much time in app, this much engagement, this many messages. But then I would ask the question, why do people use conversational UI? Why do people use chat? It's to get away from the noise. I have 7 screens that I swipe through on my phone to get to all of my apps. I have messages coming at me all day long. And so at HipChat, we ask app developers, we have about 200 plus in the ecosystem now, are you building for signal or noise? And we will actually aggressively prevent something that's driving noise in the chat room, whether through circuit breakers or just through a sit down with our product managers. And the reason I think this is important is that the minute that you allow the noise level to overcome signal is the minute you've recreated email on another platform and you destroy chat. And so I think I have not been able to come up with a great acronym for this, but the best I've come up with so far is BOOM metrics, bot engagement utility metric. So the first set that you talked about is engagement, right? How many people are using this thing? And downloads is even a hard thing to measure because you might be embedded within something else. But typical engagement metrics. And then the second one I'd encourage folks to look at is utility metrics. What is this bot doing that I no longer have to do? And I think that's where value comes from. So just as an example, context switching. So if I'm in a chat room in HipChat managing let's say Twitter, and I need to deploy new Amazon servers, I need to respond to a security threat, I probably have to Alt-Tab 9 times to 9 different web services, 9 different authentications, 9 different things that I log into. If a bot can prevent me from having to go to those 9 different web pages, that utility index is massive. And I can immediately start working. And I think that's really a key value of this.
Yeah, the
whole
core
space.
metric there is keeping friction low as possible.
Right.
Now, Peter, with Segment, I feel like you guys are potentially a really interesting company in this space. With so many bot authoring tools, so many platforms, having to figure out where to send data and when. How are bot makers using Segment and for what in terms of analytics?
Yeah, for sure. So Segment is basically a way to collect data across all the different places where customers are interacting, and then fan it out to all the different places where you're using it, like email, analytics, etc. So we have like thousands of mobile apps and lots of bot makers as well. And so there's been an interesting transition as people are starting to think about what's the difference between how you think about analytics in a traditional app versus a bot. And I think there's sort of a mental model there of, if you're looking at a traditional analytics for a GUI, right, there's a human in the loop. Like, you're analyzing what's happening. You actually need a human to look at how people are interacting with the GUI and then decide what changes need to be made. But conversational UI is actually pretty different, right? So oftentimes the analysis doesn't have a human in the loop. It's actually just computer in the loop, right? Like, the data about what the conversation entailed or what resulted goes back into a machine learning algorithm which improves the conversation. And so I think there's an interesting question of, like, what is the purpose of analytics if the machine doesn't need a human in the loop to do the analysis? And the second sort of mental framework for thinking about bot analytics, I think, is the engagement model, like whether engagement is good or bad. Actually depends on what sort of bot you're trying to make. If you're trying to make an assistant bot, or if you're trying to make a purchasing, like commerce kind of bot, you actually want to minimize the time spent in the bot, right? Like, if someone can get in and get out in 5 seconds, like, wow, that's a really successful bot. Like, you managed to purchase everything you need for your move. On the flip side, if you're a brand and you want people to engage with, was it chicken fingers from Burger King's or whatever, then you probably want people to be in there for 5-10 minutes having fun with this personality. So I think the metrics that matter for bots are different.
Have any of them been well defined? Maybe a question for Omar? You have thousands of bot makers using your platform. Is there kind of a set of tools that you give them to say, here's how you should be measuring conversation? And who's doing the analysis? Is it like a typical data analyst? Is it a mobile product person? Is it a writer, poet? Who's the?
So that's actually the challenge. Is I think a lot of developers actually came to bot making as a way of freeing themselves from. They're like, hey, now we don't have to worry about UI. And so it's going to be so much easier to do exactly what we want to do, which is like engineer something and deliver it to consumers. But the challenge is that the more you strip away, say, UI, and the more you have to actually focus on simplifying the experience even better, right? And so actually having someone working together, and you need teams that are then working together with both a good design background as well as a development background to craft these experiences that are effective. I would say that best practices are still being defined. I don't think that there's like this taxonomy of, KPIs that's emerged yet. I think there are, for most things, I think there are traditional methods that are fine, right? Like, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to engagement on a macro app sense, or engagement in the way that messaging apps report it, which is typically messages per month or messages per day type of thing. Provided that for bots, you keep an eye on the bot to user ratio, right? Because if you're just peppering a bunch of messages at a user, like we find long-term retention goes way down if that ever gets above 3 to 1, right? So it's like you've got to have people engaging as well to add value to the conversation, or else you're just spamming them. And so I think there are some of these emergent rules. The area where I think excellence still needs to be defined, and where we're still trying to figure it out from a methodology standpoint, is for things like, how do you measure from the end user's perspective when a particular conversational moment was just frustrating, right? or was just poorly engineered, or they weren't able to get to what they really wanted, and they had to deal with some kind of suboptimal thing, right? And so there we've been doing things like sampling, like exit rates, right? We're like, hey, at what points in the conversation do people leave? And let's go in and then see whether there's a moment there that's problematic that we need to dig into further. There's also things like, hey, you have all these different things that are doing intent extraction, and one of them is typically going to be, you're not helping me, right? So go in and really provide a running tally through the platform of what users are typing at any given node, so you can see what resulted in them going down that particular branch, right? So it's a lot of micro stuff that is new and different relative to traditional apps.
So I want to talk about some of that micro data. And Peter, we had a kind of interesting conversation here. If I'm going to be using a chatbot and I have this thing that's full of sensors, it's not just capturing text input. Like, what other potential interesting metrics could emerge? Could the camera turn on and capture my furrowed brow being angry at the thing?
Exactly. I think the fact that it's on a mobile device that actually has a face-facing camera and that has access to HealthKit with how many steps and all this other data collected from your Fitbit or whatever, I think this hasn't been taken advantage of, but I think there's uniquely on the mobile devices actually a lot of data that actually tells you pretty directly what the emotion or impact has been on the actual person. So I could see that being like an area that bot analytics pushes into is what really is this bot making people feel?
So there's that emotional context that needs to be instrumented somehow.
Well, if you just think about all the different things that you can pull from, you have likely a bot functioning within an existing social network or messaging network, which means that it knows who your contacts are, it knows what messages you're sent. Then you have a more full-featured version of the internet, which is the mobile internet. So it has sensors, it has GPS, it has connectivity. So a social network plus the more full-featured internet of a mobile device plus a bot is giving developers something much more significant to paint with than they would have just building a web page or just building something else. So I think that opens up the things that you can measure to find the right ones. Messaging, you mentioned being one. If someone tells you, HipChat sent more messages in the last 6 months than it did in the previous 6 years, and it's continuing to grow at that pace. Is that good or bad? Well, it sounds good. It is mostly good. But the next level question you want to ask is, are those messages sent between people? Are they sent between bots? Are they actioned? And so a good metric to look at that you mentioned is exit. So we've all interacted with a bot that doesn't know the answer, and we get frustrated and leave. So measure that message that you have that says, I don't know what's going on, or that doesn't make sense, please re-enter it. Because you can see the number of times that message shows up correlated with the number of times that conversation ends, and you realize that's maybe where you're losing 50% of your users.
We're also checking for obscenities, which actually is a pretty good correlation with when people are getting frustrated as well. They tend to start cursing pretty quickly.
What kinds of things do they say?
Even just tone, right?
Yeah,
So,
sentiment
I mean,
analysis,
obscenities are really easy to sniff out, obviously, but then you look at tone of conversation and response time. I think those are two.
Is that still a very manual process for your kind of consumer
So-
chat? I know there's an NLP
So I would say that
panel
what
downstairs,
we've
but let's go there.
So our sort of, our model is we are building key bots with strategic partners to help define like what we think are best practices, but then anyone can come out and build their own bots. And so what we do is we have certain tools and things that are internal facing, and we make sure that we use them and understand whether they're effective or not, and then open them up more broadly. One is sentiment analysis to try and see, hey, where are people getting unhappy in a conversational tree? We're working on that right now. The other one that's actually been interesting is we've so far focused on analytics as they relate to the real-time conversation. But an additional area is re-engagement, right? And it may not be relevant for all types of bots, but for us, for some of the bots that we're building, not only optimizing the engagement, but also optimizing how you re-engage a user once they've left the bot, and whether you should re-engage the user and how is actually something that really matters as well, right? And there, just like web-based re-engagement and creative, right, where you're like, oh, well, if you're gonna re-engage on the basis of notifications, well, the notification should be timely, it should be personalized, it should be relevant. All of those things matter when you're re-engaging users through a bot as well. And one of the areas that we're actually A/B testing right now is a manually tuned and optimized process versus a machine learning-based process, where the first screen is, should we even bother re-engaging this user or not? Because one thing that, from an analytics standpoint, that I think we should all pay attention to is that not only for chat in a business context, but also chat in a personal context, this is happening in an app that people have used primarily for friends and family, right? And so you have to be immensely respectful of the context. And whatever you do that goes over the top, like, people are very quick to block, and that's something that has to be layered into your strategy.
Now, all these examples we're talking about are very kind of narrow focused, like one-on-one with a bot. But what's happening with work chat is that there's teams of people, or in group messages. My girlfriend's Chinese, and we use WeChat a lot, and we're I'm in tons of group threads, and there's going to be a time when bots kind of invade those conversations in useful ways. How are you guys at HipChat? How are you thinking about those metrics from a group standpoint?
So I think there's two interesting angles there. One is, I truly don't believe a number of the fastest growing SaaS companies in the last 10 years could run their 5 nines without group chat. Whether it's HipChat, whether it's Slack, whether it's something else. And the reason I say that is, you have the IT team, the software team, the Amazon Web Services team, the security team, all inhabiting a room with a set of bots that real-time feed in. We're getting a DDoS attack. And a bot will come in with a new relic alert, for example, that says, hey, we're pinning this server, we're seeing this behavior. It will ping the room and then tag the people in that room that are relevant to that alert, bring them all together so they can take action together as a group and resolve the situation. And there's no other system that I've ever seen where 15 or 20 people can functionally collaborate in real time. And that includes machines coming into that. So I think that is a critical enterprise use case. What is interesting about that? Everybody wants to talk about K-factor of apps and virality of different tools. Well, think about this. If you're a New Relic or you're Puppet Labs or you're one of these enterprise companies, how much are you willing to spend to get engagement and awareness amongst a bigger set of users? You can buy Google AdWords, you can do the typical things. What if you built a bot, and that bot then performed functions in these chat rooms? Now you're exposing your app to 10s, 20, 30, 40 more people in your target demographic at a moment of value. And so I think there's a metric there that folks can look at, which is sort of customer acquisition cost and awareness that a bot might be able to give you with a very high value group of users.
That's a nice transition into where I want to go next. And I've been to tons of these bot meetups, and like the first questions from developers is, how can I make money with these bots? How do I think about monetization? Maybe this is a question for Omar. Are users of these kind of entertainment conversational bots, are they making money anyway? And what are some of the metrics that they think about using?
So to date, most of the dollars have been flowing in as a result of sponsored bots, right? So brands who are interested in having a presence are willing to, dip into budget to experiment. So you're definitely tapping into currently experimental budgets. And that, I think, will persist to some extent, because I think you're going to have a bot to represent your brand in a way that over time you've had to have a Facebook page or a website or whatever. But I think the long-term sustainable model, at least on the consumer side, is going to be a combination, in my mind, of advertising products that are more natural and native, conversational based. And I actually think that subscription-based models really have a shot here, because when we look at the model of usage from consumers, we're seeing micro communities we're seeing early drop off from people who, like, within the first 10 messages are like, whatever, this isn't for me. And then we're seeing a segment of hardcore users who are on average, engaging with 100 to 120 messages a day. And that level of hyper engagement persists amongst that dedicated cohort. And so I think that there will be the emergence of some element of subscription models for things that people are really passionate about. But it is very early days. I mean, none of the platforms support that level of consumer-based monetization yet.
Is there a worry of me sending a text message and that becoming like a high-value ad unit? Is that in our impending future at all? Do you guys see that?
If I'm Google, I'm either shaking in my boots or licking my lips, because Google AdWords, people will pay 50, 80, 100. Personal injury lawyers will pay $500 for a click on a Google AdWords.
Mesothelioma.
If you type into your phone, I need a personal injury lawyer, what they serve you back could well be worth $500. But think about this. If you have an enterprise sales rep that sells storage for, let's say Amazon or NetApp, right? That person has to find you, convince you to buy. What if a bot pings the room and says, you're about to run out of storage on the array to host pictures, Mr. Instagram, and you click that button and you say, ramp up 2 more nodes. You just made a sale. And you made that sale in real time with no friction, with payment information already in place. And so I think there's a massive commercial opportunity here. It won't be as clear and obvious out of the gate as some of the basic advertising was, because Google Ads essentially was the yellow pages on the internet. This is going to be a bit more nuanced, but there will be major, major financial gains here.
And we've also seen in in-app purchases that users, particularly a younger set of users, are more comfortable than ever before just throwing out $1 or $1.99. So I think there's also opportunity to upsell within that chat experience, whether it's for an enhanced experience or an actual in-app purchase or in-chat purchase that correlates to the user experience. Like, over $33 billion was spent on in-app purchases last year alone. So we're all very comfortable spending money on our phone ad hoc, unprompted.
Yeah, I think this is on the right. It's one of the conversational assistants that helps you buy things. I won't mention them by name. But they have a user that spent $65,000 via text buying hundreds of items, from Amazon, booking travel, booking hotels. So this is a real palpable thing that people are getting comfortable with.
I mean, it feels very personal, right? Like somebody just said, hey, you should buy this. Like, it feels like very actionable advice. And so, I mean, I think it's dangerous as well, right? So you kind of have to obviously tailor that. Monetization does not worry me insofar as whether I think there's potential there or not. I think much is dependent on the platforms themselves being effective in providing those tools and those integration points in a way that makes sense for consumers. But I think it will emerge.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we have some time for questions. Yeah, 3 minutes. Don't be shy.
While we surface a question, I'll just...
Yeah.
The Atlassian experience has been a company that went from 0 to a $5 billion IPO with no salespeople. And that was basically done through traditional web virality, basically people sharing and word of mouth. So if a company can do that in enterprise software, what could a bot do? What could a bot do that knows who you are, that knows the minute you open Facebook Messenger what you like and who your friends are and where you're located and who you're sending the flowers to, for example? To me, that takes 6 layers of friction out of it. And I think that is a really, really interesting opportunity.
I totally agree. And it's just we're not there. And the early experiences have been so bad. Even one of the Facebook launch partners, I tried it recently. And I said, hey. And it says, hey, what's your name? And I said, shouldn't you know that? And then it was calling me, shouldn't you know that, for the rest of the conversation.
So app discovery, bot discovery is a real problem, right?
Yes.
11,000 bots on Facebook. If everyone, this is a very special room. Let's get out of here and go somewhere else. Go into Facebook Messenger and find me a bot that you want to use. It's impossible. It's very difficult to find it and set it up and run it and know what it does. And so I think finding ways to surface the right bot in the right place at the right time is a place where analytics can play a really, really powerful role. And it remains to be seen whether that's something Facebook can do, whether that's something that a third party provides. I think that's undiscovered country.
Yeah. So there's that link between discovery and analytics that still needs to be built.
Yeah, we've approached it a little bit with, we have a thing called MarlinBot. We haven't deployed this, but what it does is it notices that you've shared certain links with certain frequency, and it would have the ability to then check against the Atlassian marketplace and say, we notice you shared Big Panda links 92 times this week with your team. Did you know there's a Big Panda app or bot for HipChat? And it would be able to surface it. We haven't turned it on yet because I think people still are working out the privacy and the spookiness factors, but that's something we think we can use to help our ecosystem surface the right apps to the right people at the right time.
And the question there is how many layers of authentication do users need to feel comfortable with in allowing for something like that to be deployed? Sure, there are services that can be provided, but surely there are nefarious things in authenticating so much personal information to a bot.
On the topic of discovery, I think Chris Messina's presentation earlier was interesting, where it showed sort of like the layers of web and then mobile and then now bots. I think if you look at how even mobile apps still get distributed, a lot of that distribution happens via the web. And I think bots, to a large extent, are not getting distributed via bots, right? They're getting distributed via mobile apps, which are getting distributed via web. And so I think it really is, certainly in terms of the marketing channels and how people actually go and discover bots, there will still be a website, there'll still be a mobile app. And so all the pieces of analytics infrastructure and all the sort of ecosystems will continue building up to actually help sort of power bot distribution, I think.
Awesome. I think that's the time that we have. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your insights.
Thanks, everybody.